Hello, everyone, live from Brussels and Oregon. I'm very happy to introduce ZN Live. I have on the show today Mike Sachs. He's the founder of ACT, the App Association, and also an entrepreneur. He has his own app company called Well Beyond that makes mindfulness apps for children. He was born here in Belgium, but moved to the States when he was 24, but he comes back regularly. So my first question is, why did you leave this beautiful, sunny place? You know, it's always sunny here in Belgium. Why did you leave, Mike?
That's a very good question. And I really loved software, and I still do. But I was having a hard time selling it in Europe. I had software initially for cash registers, and I was going around and trying to demonstrate it. And I didn't have a car, so I sometimes would have to travel quite a bit. And then when I got there, people would basically sometimes literally laugh at me because I looked so young, and I felt like, people will never take me seriously until I turn 40. So I'll just try it somewhere else where people look at you when you're young and they say, oh, you have this and this capability, and they appreciated that more. And another part of that was that it was before the internet, so in order to sell through one audience, you basically had to, in Europe, you had to have a phone number in every country. You had to have the ways to take people's orders, because there was not even a single currency, I think, back then. And so everything was a little bit more difficult. And when I came to the US, I was able to basically have a single phone number, have one magazine that I would advertise in, and I could address a big market. So if the European currency, if the euro and the internet had existed, I'm not even sure if I would have moved to the US. I think, today you can be successful anywhere in the world. You can address a global audience if you make apps. You just put your app on the App Store, and you have the ability to sell in I don't know how many countries all over the world, in all the different currencies. And you can even nowadays translate your app fairly easily in the local languages. And I do this fairly regularly, provide support for people in customer service using their own language, because we can use AI these days to translate. So it was a very different world back then. And frankly, I don't think I would have moved from Belgium to the United States if all those abilities, that technology, and also, frankly, the political changes and the economic changes in Europe would have been available to me back then.
Very interesting. And what was it like in terms of communication, for example? Isn't the communication quite different between, from
Yes.
Belgium and the US? Tell me about that.
Well, it was, I was fairly young, so I would call my parents once a week, and it was a long distance phone call. There was no visual contact. And because it was expensive, it was a few minutes per week, the nature of the kinds of conversation that you would have would be very different. You would be more like checking in, how are you? But if you really, want to have a good ongoing relationship with somebody, you need that time to be quiet and to not be in a hurry. And so I think about that, how lucky we are today that we can be, so far apart, but at the same time feel very close and connected with each other.
And in terms of communication style between, how Americans communicate and the way Belgians communicate, I don't want to speak about Europeans because there is no, as we all
Yes.
know, but Belgians specifically. Did you fit in easily? Did you struggle? Was it what can you say about the difference in communication style?
Well, I think the first to say how Americans communicate, it's such a large country, so it is a little bit like saying how Europeans communicate very, very different styles depending on where you are. I would say that I was used to being quite direct and speaking my mind very directly. And that was sometimes considered, you know, uh, maybe offensive is not the right word, but insensitive. And people would kind of be shocked about that, because the level of directness that we have in Belgium, and I think in the Netherlands too, is not really something that people are used to, and they don't always understand that that's meant from a good place. Because in the US, where I am today, right now, saying something that directly, you would normally only do when you're actually upset about something and you cannot stop yourself. You have to say it directly instead of like trying to wrap it up into something or saying something more indirectly. So that was a big difference. At the same time, I also think, like, when we talk with politicians, things have changed as well, right? The way we talk to politicians about policymakers can be very different. I do think that, like, for example, coming in the EU and having conversations with the Commission staff or with members of Parliament, we sometimes do have very direct conversations that end up being much more productive, frankly, because you can actually talk about the real things instead of dancing around it. It's funny how Americans are known for being direct, but I feel, to me, and maybe it's because I'm used to and I grew up with this style, I feel that sometimes Europeans are more direct and more willing to basically, talk about things head on instead of dancing around it. And it's also true that everywhere you have times when people are very nice, and you have to read between the lines, and you have to understand, and at the same time you need to be able to I would say write between the lines, so saying things in a way that doesn't come across too directly. So yeah, it's very there's no big label that I think you can put on the US or Europe or Belgium. It's all in the subtleties.
Do you think everyone should have this experience of living abroad or being outside of the country they grew up in to get that intercultural appreciation or sensitivity, and not be so, I don't know, narrow-minded, or maybe that's too strong a word, but
well, I think it would probably make the world better, but at the same time, my exposure is also quite limited. I've only been really in the US and in Europe, and only in, I've been to a lot of parts of Europe, but I've only spent real time in Belgium and in Spain and, in the Netherlands and France, but I haven't really been immersed in other parts of Europe. So I almost wish that I had, but we are all humans and only have one lifetime, and it's okay to be aware of our limitations.
Yeah. So maybe before we move on to the next topic, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the differences that you've encountered, and some of the things that maybe, because there are a lot of preconceptions maybe about the States, but you also enjoy it in Oregon and Washington, D.C., I guess, as well. What are some of the other things you've noticed? Ageism, I guess, is one of the things that you notice here in Europe, and both against young people, that you weren't really appreciated when you started your own company. People thought you were too young. We see the same with old people, for example, here in They're quick to be dismissed. They're not taken so seriously anymore. It's hard for people over 50 even to find jobs in Europe. Also because of how much they cost, maybe because of security, social security, but also really because of ageism. Research shows. I think in the States that's different. You have flight attendants over 70 years
Yeah.
old doing first class. It's quite an interesting experience, and you see this all across, in all walks of life. What are some of the other things that you think Europe can learn from the States, not just in communication, but maybe in other parts of life as well?
Yes, it's funny you mentioned flight attendants, because I remember when I first traveled to the US, I was surprised by that. And sometimes I think in Europe, you ideally would be perpetually 40, because that's considered a prime age for people when they are considered to be most capable, which I personally know to not always be true. In terms of other differences, I would say, for me, from my personal experience, being an immigrant in the US has made me appreciate. I would say it's the American integration model is very friendly to the culture that you bring into society. So you can be, an Irish American, a Jewish American, an Italian American, an Indian American. You can bring your culture, you can have your celebrations, you can dress the way you want, make the food that you want, and also express it. And it's not only accepted, it's embraced and celebrated. Whereas sometimes in European societies, I feel like, if you are outwardly displaying who you are, what your culture is, that can be frowned upon. And you almost have to choose. Are you going to be a Belgian, or are you clinging to your old ways? And that should not be a choice. That's not something that is in conflict with each other. And so that is something I really do appreciate about American society. And of course, there are so many of the other more stereotypical differences. And frankly, a lot of those things are true. Guns are a very big problem. The lack of universal healthcare coverage is very serious. Bankruptcy is the main reason for bankruptcy, I think, is medical bankruptcy, because people just cannot pay their bills anymore. So there are some very serious problems in society that need to be solved, and I don't know if they will be. But from my own personal experience, I like the integration model. And of course, there is racism and intolerance in every society. So that is true in the US, and it's true in many parts of Europe as well.
Yeah, 100%. Because if you allow people to be themselves, then they are also more likely to adopt the new culture. So I really recognize and see that. Let's move on to the next topic, and that is AI. You mentioned it already, that you're using it for translations. I think we're all using it. I'm using it for pretty much everything, including pictures as well. Really helpful. Because you can just say, hey, I want a picture of myself in that setting with that shirt on, with that, so it's
Yeah.
because usually my pictures are with friends and family, and so when you need a professional one, it's not so easy to do. But you mentioned to me, because we spoke before the show, and you said, let's talk a little bit about bias and pitfalls. So tell me more about that. Maybe not so much in the policy setting. Tell me how you feel about that part of AI. Does it have a lot of biases? We read a lot about that in the beginning when it first came out, when it would tell jokes about men but not about women. That's not what you talk about. What you were talking about. So tell me a little bit more about the biases.
Well, I think the biggest The most interesting part about that is that AI is a lot like people. I mean, we have designed AI to be like human intelligence, or that's kind of our goal when we're trying to work on AI. And as a result of that, it tends to act a lot like people. And frankly, people are biased. People have prejudice. People don't always act objectively. And I think because it's done with AI, we can measure it, we can look at it more, and we do have more scrutiny for AI. For example, in a self-driving car, we would not allow cars to be self-driving unless they become, those self-driving cars are much better than human drivers. We would never allow somebody who's only as good a driver as I am, for example, on the road, because it would be dangerous, or we would consider it dangerous. So the bar that we have for AI is much higher. And at some point, when cars get better, self-driving cars get better, they will get so good that we will say, well, we shouldn't allow humans to drive these cars anymore because it's so dangerous. And I think the same is true when we scrutinize AI for things like bias. So we should have a bar that is a lot higher. We should not accept this because we can measure it and because we can do something about it. And we should use the tools, including AI itself, that we have available to look for those bias and then, to make adjustments. So we don't have that kind of bias. And we use AI not just, to make photos or to use speech recognition to turn on the lights or close the curtains, but we use it for things like loan applications or to decide whether somebody gets a medical procedure. And when we do that, it's super important that we don't allow for bias to exist. There will always be bias because AI is a reflection of humanity in some ways, but we need to minimize it and we need to measure it, and we need to always continuously work to try to avoid it as much as possible.
Wouldn't it be possible to create scripts that would eliminate the bias? So with loan applications, for example, that we just write
Yeah.
a script or a prompt that says, make sure that you exclude these criteria from the loan application
Mhm.
process. Shouldn't it be simple?
Well, I think that's the interesting part is that companies already try to do this with their own call centers and training of their employees, but the bias that gets through is not the obvious one. It's the one where other indicators, for example, of education, where you live, your credit history, what financial resources you have available, those are things that might have affected your life before. And because you are a minority, you may have a different set of criteria that the AI ends up looking at. And it's with humans, we call it subconsciously, right? Because I cannot say why I made that decision, but I just had this feeling, and that feeling might actually be rooted in prejudice. With AI, it could be very similar. The AI makes decisions based. It's not a program where you can say, if this happens, then do this, add this to the score. No, it's much more what we would call intuitive, and so it's harder to explain. And so there's a lot of work going on today in essentially trying to explain decisions that AI made in order to then be able to justify the decision, to show that there was no bias, or to discover the bias if there was. And that's still an area that's developing quite quickly. And I do think that from a policy point of view, it makes sense to insist on that, to basically say you need to build in the tools that avoid bias, and you also need to work as much as possible on helping the AI that you create explain how it arrived to a certain decision.
Did you see the founder of OpenAI in Congress yesterday?
I didn't watch the whole. I only saw little clips, but it looked like people were happy that He was straightforward, wasn't trying to hide anything. And it is true that it's both incredibly promising and, um, there was an article that said, is AI the next printing press or is it the next atomic bomb? Which of those inventions is going to be the model for that? And I personally think it's much more likely to be like the printing press. And for example, a few months ago, there was a call from a lot of people to say we should put AI research on hold for 6 months, and then so we can develop some policy around it, and then we can continue. And I didn't think that made a lot of sense, because it would be as if we would have said, let's not use the printing press for 6 months in the very early days.
Yeah.
It would not have changed history very much. Or maybe it would have, and they would have killed it if they really understood the full consequences. But I think it will be a tool that we use to express ourselves, to be able to understand things better, to think through things. So it's not going to take over humanity. It's going to be a tool that we use, just like we use this video conferencing right now to communicate better and to connect with each other and to understand each other and to think bigger. So I'm quite optimistic about it.
But it's so funny how fast it moves, how fast it develops. Because I gave a training when ChatGPT first came out, and it was a training about how to become a brand ambassador. And it had just come out, and had been playing with it. And I said, if you're lost for inspiration, maybe use it as a tool. You can. And people were, and I did a little poll, like, how many of you would use it? And I think 90% said never.
Everybody.
Never. And now children in my kids' class, they're all using it for their homework. Like, now everybody is using it. And this is what, like, it came out, like 3 months ago, like a really, I don't know, like a couple of months ago. Right. And, and people were honestly shocked that I would dare suggesting that in the course. I was like, look, take a look. This is really interesting. And I said, you can use it for inspiration. Of course, you still need to check it, because, and similarly, when and people are really afraid now because we have the European elections coming up next year, next year, and they're like, okay, this is going to be huge, and all this fake news, but then they were saying that when first the image. When you could change images, people were really afraid that at first people would fall for it and think that it was real, right? But now, people know that we can generate images of the Pope and everyone else, and people fall for it. But now people know, like, images can be fake, videos can be fake, they're deep fakes, and so very quickly people start playing with it. People start using it. School children are using it. Videos can be fake, pictures can be fake, or almost real.
Right. If you could go back in time with modern technology and you would show it to people, you could claim that you have magic, because it would look like that. I was talking to a teacher, and how it's always, it already seems so long ago, but a few weeks ago there was conversation about we should prohibit AI in school, because basically very similar arguments to banning calculators. And my friend, who's a teacher, basically said that he uses AI in the classroom and basically tells kids, okay, ask ChatGPT to write an essay for you, and then your job is to make the essay better, and turn in the original one and turn in the one that you improved, and that is your homework. And I think that is the right way to think about these things. So yes,
that's a good teacher right there. So let's talk a little bit about your own app company that we briefly mentioned before. It's called Wellbeing. So tell me why it's called Wellbeing and what it does.
Wellbeyond is the
Wellbeyond.
name.
I'm so sorry, but it's not even called, like, I want to talk about my well-being. That's why.
Yes, the mission is to help you live simpler and feel better. And one of the first apps was a meditation app for children. I was sitting down with somebody who's a yoga and meditation teacher, and this was, quite early in the app story, and we were thinking about how we could make something of value. And there were quite a few meditation apps already out there. So we thought, well, why not make one for kids? And then we came up with the kinds of things that kids need help with, which is, of course, sleep. Or parents need help having their kids go to bed and sleep. Focus, homework, managing feelings, and also cultivating, love and friendship. And so we came up. There was a painter who was local, and she was very good at painting these very vibrant, childlike images. And we said, "Hey, can you create these cards so we can have meditation cards? And can you make a card that, for example, expresses friendship or love or sleep?" And some of these concepts are quite abstract. But she made a bunch of sketches, and she shared the sketches. Even though we were very close to each other, she shared them by email, just pictures from her sketchbook. And we developed the visuals for that. And then we worked on the meditations. And then we worked with a child psychologist and created this beautiful meditation app that ended up going to #3 in the App Store. And it's still being used by a lot of parents, by therapists in schools, and teachers use it before they start a test or something like that to help kids get grounded and focused and ready to take on an
That's
intellectual challenge.
For what age is it?
It's for kids between 5 and 12. There's a fairly large range, but it ends up, that a lot of kids who kind of started with it, they continue to use it and appreciate it even as they get a little bit older. So parents, yeah, I think you would enjoy it, but at the same time, it can also be difficult to, convince kids that they should try this. So you have to be very not too pushy about it, because otherwise they'll just be like, no, that's not for me.
Yeah. So how do you get them to use it? Because they need it, but that doesn't mean that they are naturally going to.
Yeah. So a lot of the meditations are only just a few minutes, which really helps. So not trying to make it too long. So 2 or 3 minutes. I also think that in general, having kids be open to mindfulness and becoming aware of their own body and their own breath, for example, can be very useful. If you just say, okay, take a deep breath, and then, breathe in, breathe out, and you breathe out a little bit longer than you breathe in, so that you start calming down, then kids are very smart and they notice that. And then when they do that a few times, they start seeing the value, and then they become more willing to say, okay, now I'll try something that takes a little bit longer. So I think the best thing is to just talk to your kids and point out how they can become aware of their own mental state of mind and how their body interacts with that. And most of that is the breath, frankly, because if you want to be excited, you breathe in, you spend more time breathing in and less time breathing out. If you want to calm down, you focus on breathing out slowly, and you're going to get less agitated or stressed. And kids are probably more capable of being in tune with that than we are as adults.
How about adults that might be watching? Do you have some tips for them for adults who want to integrate mindfulness in their lives? For some reason, a lot of people have come to me recently saying how stressed out they are, how they're close to burnouts. I don't know why.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's the time of year or I don't know what's going on. But well, what should I tell them? What should we tell them right now?
I would say that practicing. Oh, I don't know why my lights just went off.
You got the guru
Hey
lights.
Siri, Zoom office. I hope my this is very.
It's like
Um,
your gurus.
oh, one moment.
I, I thought it was very zen what happened with the lights all of a sudden with Mike. If this doesn't work out, we'll go and I'll tell you a little bit about my recommendations for this week. And by the way, I haven't told you yet that Phil is in Copenhagen, which is why he is not with us today. But he will be back next week when we have our next guest. I think Mike is back now. Are you
I
back,
think
Mike?
the AI heard me talk and
Our
decided to
AI is taking over.
join the show. Yeah. um, so tips for reducing stress. Um, the breath, I think, is the central part. And anytime when we are impatient, we can make that a trigger to basically take a moment and enjoy, being human, breathing, being noticing our breath, and slowing down our breath. And instead of saying, "Oh, I'm in a hurry," if you're standing in the checkout stand, why is this person not moving fast? What is going to happen if I'm late? Am I going to just leaving that all behind and taking it as an opportunity to say, oh, I have a moment here for myself where I can just enjoy my breath and be in my body. And I know this sounds very silly almost, but it really does change the way you look at things. It's when I feel impatient, I have an automatic trigger now that makes me go back to that place where I can just relax. And so instead of those moments becoming very annoying and actually making me more stressed, those moments are opportunities to kind of like push the reset button a little bit, and then my day goes much better that way. So I think that's the only thing. If you only do that, your life will be much better.
I love that because there's nothing you can do if you're stuck in traffic or if you're waiting for a tram. It's not going to come faster if you're stressed out, pacing back and
Yeah.
forth. You will use that to listen to a song or focus on your breath, as you say. Yeah, because when I look at you, even just having this conversation, I feel so zen. You were playing around with your music, and I almost forgot that I had to say something for our because I felt so zen because you have such a zen way of speaking. I think your effect on others, definitely on me, is very zen. That's your whole being is quite well beyond. No, I don't think it's a verb, but or it's a noun that we can use like that. But yeah, that's very interesting. So that's an excellent tip. Any other tips you want to share with us before we move to the recommendations of books and things?
I think I'm not going to. I only have one tip, and that was a good one, I thought. So stick
I
with
agree.
that.
I agree.
Yep.
We're all gonna do. Take a breath, don't stress, and use it and see it as a gift. Someone is giving us extra time.
And also make the first part is really important. Noticing that I'm stressed is the trigger that then allows me to do the next step, which is to relax. But that trigger is the most important thing because in most cases we don't recognize that we're stressed and we're just caught up in it. And it's that that moment of recognition that then, if you do it multiple times, becomes a habit that creates a dynamic that kind of becomes better and better over time.
Yes, I see. Excellent. All right, let's go to the recommendations. So
I have one book, and it's a book about what I just talked about, although it's almost the opposite. It's called The Little Book of Big Change. And the subtitle is The No Willpower Approach to Breaking Any Habit. But I also think that it is a book about forming good habits as well. And what it talks about is self-awareness and perspective. It's looking at the things that we do automatically in our lives and becoming aware of it, see how it works, what it leads to, how it is created, and then change it, making small changes to change the habits that we have for the better, and also having the perspective to be aware that we are not our habits, that we don't have to identify with the feelings that we have in this moment. And by just simply doing that, we already gain tremendous power over our own state of being. And so that book is very practical, but it's rooted in a lot of psychology and even, studies from thousands of years from that a lot of people through various religions and scientific research have discovered, and it puts it in a very practical way that you can apply directly in your life.
fantastic. I have to. Do you have any other recommendations?
I'm going to stick with one for this one as well. Just read this one book and it will make you laugh better.
I'm on it. I will read it. I have two recommendations. One is this book, The Founder's Mentality, that I'm about to finish. It's an amazing book if you're leading a company, especially a company that maybe it doesn't actually matter which size, but it was starting really strong. It's a founder with a great idea. And then you get into a place where you're building systems. Maybe you're lost that initial passion, or you get stuck into it. It says here in the predictable crisis, or you're stuck in a crisis of growth. What I love about it is it's that it's very much focused on the front line, the quality. It's about encouraging an ownership mindset throughout the organization, really focusing on how it's about being agile, and that everyone, all employees, everyone who works at the company should be fully aligned with the goals, understand the goals, and be fully obsessed with the front line. It's also not over complicating processes, but really being focused on what are we trying to do here. What does our client, what does our customer want? It's a really inspirational book, and shows that you can grow by really being excellent at what you do. Really, really interesting book. The second thing that I would like to recommend, it's not a book, it's more something that I'm been coaching a lot of women, both within ZN, but also outside of ZN in my private life. And I realized that there's still something. I mean, it's not still. I think it's something from all ages, that there's still a lot of anxiety that happens. Of course, both men and women have this, but I realized that, for example, when applying to jobs, there's still a lot of imposter syndrome, especially with women. It's holding us back. So, for example, and I've been looking up the numbers, women only apply to jobs when they feel they tick every single one of the boxes, where men, they're like 60%, they're like, sure, I can do this, and they apply to a job. Again, it's not all men, it's not all women, but generically speaking, this is the case. And I noticed this, for example, when women come to me, young women, especially inside ZN, they always ask, oh, I'm unsure about this. Can you coach me about that? Can you give me more knowledge? When men come to me, it's like, how can I advance? How can I get more response? How how can I get a better position? How can I get? So it's a very different type of questions, and I think there's a lot more, insecurity with women still, a lot more waiting for recognition, whereas with men it's more, I deserve more, I want more money, and like so. So I would like, my recommendation for this week is to really have a lot more confidence, to not feel like you need to know everything before you start. For example, every job, I have only applied for jobs that I felt completely comfortable that I could do, and then yet when you start, you realize there's a lot that you don't know. So it's not even a strategy that works. So you need to be a lot more confident in what you do, knowing that you will never know anything anyway, knowing that you need to do, knowing that you need to learn constantly, and knowing that you are so much more. And all the women that have come to me to advise, they're all such competent, fantastic individuals that are always so eager to learn. And it's precisely that eagerness to learn that means that you will be fabulous, regardless of what it is that you. So I think women and men, of course, but women need to aim much higher. I don't know if that, and you can always come to me and I'll coach you and support you. And let's all, support each other as well. And about atomic habits, I don't know if the question was to Mike. He can answer afterwards. Yes, we love that book at ZN. It's very powerful to start something small, do it every day. For example, I'm at day, I believe, 278 of my French course with a French app, by the way, that I take. If you want to take up running, start small, then progressively build it up. Atomic Habits is so powerful because it starts with little habits, and then you do something, more every day. So that's a very powerful book that shows that it starts small, and then you can really, because if you do something small, but you do it every day, can you imagine how much you can achieve in the course of a year or 2 years or 5 years? I don't know if you read the book, Atomic Habits, Mike.
I read it quite a long time ago. But again, I think it's about our awareness of how we do things as humans. And if we start something, we're more likely to keep doing it. And so, if you try to work out, just getting out the door, making that your goal, will make it much more likely that you get out the door. And then once you are out the door, you're much more likely to take the next step, because you're not going to just, and some days you might step out the door and come back. But if that's just your goal, then you don't come up with excuses not to do it. You just
I saw
begin.
a LinkedIn video of a I don't know who this guy was. It was shared on my feed, and this guy was running quite long distances. But he said, "Why don't you start walking up and down the street? And then when you feel okay, I can do this, you walk up and down the street twice, and then you go around the block, and then you go around. So so that's how you start habits. But every day the goal is a little bit before you know it, you're running 12 kilometers every day.
Yeah,
that's how the habit starts. It's quite good. Anita is watching, and she says, "Thank you, Mike, for so many inspirations. Your thoughts on being an immigrant, expat, AI, and mindfulness. Let's breathe. It's Friday."
It's Friday.
Mike, and we know. Anita, thank you for watching, Anita. Well, Mike, I think we spent quite a lot of time together, so I'm not going to take any more of your time and of the viewers' time, but I found it a very enjoyable conversation. I hope you did as well. And
I most certainly did. It was very enjoyable, and I always enjoy ZN Live. So thank you for doing this so regularly.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, Mike. See you soon.